You. So we're testing out, Reggie doesn't do a whole lot with his YouTube productions. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a live stream and I'm going to have somebody participate. So everybody give me 1 second. I'm assuming it's live now. Let's set the other part up and then we'll be good to go. Let's test it out because as is usual, things are not working as intended. Live stream, let's share. Okay, we're going to invite participants. Give me a second. Obviously, I definitely do need to hire somebody to do my media. Okay. So you should be good to go in 1 minute, and then we'll start the conversation. One, two, three, four. Four. It's be easier way than this, huh? Go offline for a minute. Okay, people, we're good to go. I'm about to do an AMA. Had to set up the Zoom thing. And for some reason, it doesn't work through the higher quality cell phone camera. So I had to use a lower quality computer account. And as you can tell, I'm just biding time, waiting for someone else to come online. So I'm talking mishmash. So those who follow me on Twitter should have seen the tweet that I put out last night. Long story short, it provides proof of Ethereum infringing on the 566 patent out of the US and the similar patent out of Japan. It's not an accusation or it's not a legal document. And I'm not saying I'm going after A, B, or C. What this is research, but it's real research. It's a type of research that you simply can't find on the web. Now, if Ethereum infringes, then anything that uses Ethereum for profit infringes. It's a 3-page document in ping format with a 4-page document with the circle chart. This is interesting. It's actually, I think, some of the hardest hitting stuff you'd find on Twitter. Notice the low take up on it though. And the reason is because this is stuff that people really don't want to get around. But I'm thinking we should have an open discourse and conversation. And on that note, we have Trek and we have Coco from the Very DAO. Okay, this was a last minute thing, so I'm sorry I didn't get to invite anybody. You know, as you see, I even went live before I even figured out how to get YouTube and Zoom together. So Trek, introduce yourself. Let my audience know. Well, I don't have Twitter Spaces going because it's a lot, but we'll do that next time. So between the two of them, we should have an audience, a possible audience of up to like 60, 70,000 people. Okay.
All right. So I'm Trek Kays. I have been in the crypto space for a number of years. I'm like the pre-2016 timeline, tweet really before 2015. And so currently content guy on a couple of different YouTube channels. I do content on the development of crypto, Z channel. I do a weekend crypto segment, and I also do a segment on Blood TV, which is called My Two Satoshis. And basic idea is to cover news that happens in space and, you know, bringing it to the community and to the people. And I've been talking to Reggie about the whole situation as far as the patent and what it really means within this space. And I do think that it is a very unfair shake of how this watershed moment is not being acknowledged on the public side as far as the companies and stuff, and then even just for the other parts of the community and conversation to really take into account like what this patent really means. But that's just my opinion on the whole thing.
Okay, so the reason why I asked Trek to show up is instead of me sitting there pontificating from my soapbox, you know, you have somebody who doesn't have, you know, 2 or 3 years of studying a particular patent and 6 or 7 years of prosecuting a patent ask questions, because it's much more likely to be a layman's perspective. And I think that's probably the best questions to ask, because, you know, I am aware I probably missed the mark. So on that note, ask away.
Oh, we go to the other person. All right. So just real quick, I'm also doing the Twitter Spaces side on my account side. So if the audio sounds a little janky for you on the Crypto Live, you can jump over to the Twitter Spaces. It's TREKKW number 2 Ks. It will pop up. It's Trek with 2 Ks and in the Twitter Spaces right now. So we're doing it live on both sides now. Man. So we had a conversation over the weekend that definitely broadened my understanding of your approach on how you're going about informing the public and particularly the company that you name in the initial report. And one of the things I was kind of wondering is, so y'all know, no background in law. I'm not the techie dude as far as I don't code or anything like that, just been around the space for a while, right? And so one of the things you bring up in the initial, the report on the DAO is, well, you can give people notification through social media, which made me think how back in the day, you know, when newspapers were a thing, public notice would be done in that form. And so now we have it this way, where social media is arguably more expansive than the traditional newspaper. So at this point, considering how much you've been pushing it out, and then like other people within the very community, as well as like people like myself and other folks who've been following you for a while, has there been enough public notice? And how do you?
That depends on who you ask. So what I'm doing is I'm simply looking to create awareness and to educate. It's been my personal opinion that many in the crypto space are not well versed in patent law, which I'm not a patent lawyer, so I'm one of those people, as a full disclaimer, but also may not be taking the most prudent or profitable route from a business perspective. I think the law, the cypherpunk initial open source developer law, is IP protection bad, open source good, which, really doesn't make any sense. The mere fact that someone would take that perspective. Hold for 1 second, let me just create a spaces myself. The reason why someone would take that perspective basically means they don't understand how IP protection works. Because if you're open source, okay, and if you show that you're open source, or if you enforce the open source rules, then you're using IP protection. So if you use an MIT contract, so to say, the MIT license, the MIT license is a contract that enforces certain rules on your intellectual property. That means you're in favor of IP protection. But a lot of people think IP protection and open source are antithetical, opposite ends of the spectrum, mutually exclusive. And it makes no sense at all. If you do not have control over your IP, it's not your IP. Okay. So if you're not in favor of IP protection, then you're not in favor of open source. That's my perspective.
So, all right. Because I feel like there's a distinction in what we understand outside of the legal world of people, legalese and all that.
And I like to say once again, I'm not a lawyer, so.
Okay, so we're on the same train. Okay. But the idea of what we see is what we commonly understand of open source is a different perspective than what a lawyer would look at, as far as like, is there some kind of documentation that says any and everyone is free to use this in X amount of way? They're not free to use it in X amount of way. Like, I feel like that's what was outside of the legal side. We're taking it that way, where we don't acknowledge, I don't know to say we're not aware, but that for how the technology has been distributed out of public open space, that legislation how do I say this? In practice, in the open space, doesn't hold. Like, one of the things that always got me in the beginning about blockchain technology, as far as it being open source, was you have the idea of what the designer intends, but once you put it out in the open, then it's, well, whatever the end user figure they can do with it, but try to experiment, right? But what it sounds like you're saying is, even if you make a patent that says, hey, an MIT patent that says you can openly use it for whatever, that still goes towards, there is an acknowledgement of patent law, even though it's restricted use.
Let me jump in right there, because you're mixing and maxing a couple of terms.
Okay.
Probably just by mistake. So you said an open source patent. You mean, I probably mean an open source software license. Is that what you meant when you said open source?
Okay, open source software license.
Okay. So if you're able to create a license, that means
Mhm.
you're looking to exercise control over the software, over the intellectual property, right? And if you're looking to exercise control over the intellectual property, well, then you believe in intellectual property rights. It doesn't matter what that control is. Suppose that control is to make sure that everybody has free access to this IP. Well, then you're looking to exercise control over it. Okay. Or you want to make sure nobody copies that IP without your permission. Well, you're looking to exercise control over it. Or you want to make sure nobody uses it for profit or makes changes without attribution or, X, Y, and Z. Long story
Okay,
short,
go ahead.
go ahead.
So that's what I'm saying. Like that's that fine distinction in what like the legal mind would note as, are you trying to have some level of control and influence? So whether I say I want everyone to be able to use this versus I want only selected people who, do like pay a fee for it to use it, the scale of control is very wide on that, right? But in
Yeah,
regards
let's take smaller chunks. So that, I don't want to interrupt you, but smaller chunks. So any property owner who admits they're property owner wants control over their property, or else you wouldn't consider yourself the owner of the property. Intellectual property, patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc., are personal property. Okay, most people want control over their personal property. When you go home to your house, right? I see you have graphics on the wall behind you. You wanted to put those graphics on the wall. You consider it your wall. You expect to have control over it, right? You have a title to the deed. You have a lease, etc. You expect to have control over whatever property you own, and that's natural. It's the Constitution. It's the law, and it's also to be expected. Now, what you do with that control is up to you within reason, but it's still exercising control. You cannot say, I believe in open source and then say, I don't believe in intellectual property protection. It's like saying, I don't believe in water, but I like it when it rains. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, so then basically no one can just make software, throw it out into the public and be like, let people do what they want to do with it because someone
You
is going to
can.
look to have.
You can't do that. I'm saying you can do that. But if you're going to do that, don't put a license agreement on it. Once you put a license agreement on it, you're now bringing the law into play and you're trying to enforce certain behaviors from somebody. Even if that behavior is to make sure everybody else gets it for free. If you want everybody to have it for free, it's like this. You make money, okay? You have $100,000 in a bag, right? If you just want to give it away, you take that bag, you throw it out into the street and walk away. And you've given it out, you truly open sourced it. You've given it out and they can do whatever they want with it. But if you want people to use that money for a certain reason, then you have to create a contract, for the use of that money. And that's where these software licenses come into play. The BSD, MIT, the GNL, etc.
Okay, so yes, with framing of understanding, it definitely makes more sense in regards to looking at how a patent should be acknowledged in this space. And then we're not like super legalese here, but with that framing, I think that is definitely simple enough to say, if you're looking to influence whatever this intellectual property is, even if you want everybody to use it with conditions, then yeah, it makes sense.
Let me just jump in one more time. We actually have a superstar who just walked in. This is my son, Messiah. Say hi, Messiah. Anybody who was in Veritation from 2017, you most likely dealt with him on the tech and the support side. So this is my resident genius here. I'll put you on pause for mute for 1 second, okay?
Yeah. All right, so really quick for the side of the Twitter Spaces that's open right now, thanks for coming in. Ahmed, I appreciate. So basically going on right now is I'm having a conversation on YouTube Live with Middleton and we're talking about the patent that he has that's here in the US and then the other one that's in Japan, but we're more focused on what is the effect going on here in the US and having a real conversation, or at least starting to open up the dialogue and have a real conversation about why this is a very important moment within the blockchain space, and how a number of the companies that are like that are like the big name companies in this are seemingly publicly ignoring that this patent is there. And so what I want to really work on doing is expand this conversation in regards to having other professionals who are in the space, as well as a conversation in the community. So in like the Stacks community, the Cosmos community, Avalanche, whoever's other community, but the idea of, if you're talking about, we know regulation. I'm sorry, Reggie, I'm explaining some stuff on the Twitter Spaces right now. My thing is, if you're talking about, we know regulation is coming down, there's a whole bunch of signaling coming out of DC, out of the different states, out of different countries, and we know patent law is a thing and patent enforcement is a thing, then 100% be conversation that is really being had in this space, as well as companies who are CeFi companies. Bottom line, a lot of the DeFi companies that market as DeFi is not. So that's one thing onto itself. But the idea of, hey, this thing is here, you're a business that operates off of this model, at least how I understand it. So what are you doing to actually like acknowledge, or at least change, how do I say this? Acknowledge the infringement. That's the bottom line of how I'm looking at it. All right, I'm sorry. So
I want to jump in on that space because I noticed there's some misunderstanding. A lot of people say, well, people are never going to acknowledge your patent, and you're never going to be able to enforce it. And opinions are cool. Unfortunately, a lot of those opinions are coming from people who just don't understand the space. So my superpower, I don't think I'm smarter than many other people, but I do have a superpower that most people don't have. And that superpower is I know what I don't know. And I don't have to pretend that I know what I don't know, because I don't know it. So with that being the case, if I didn't understand patent law, particularly crypto patent law, instead of trying to believe that I know it and say things that are basically coming out my anus, right? I would either learn it myself, or I would partner or hire people who know what they're talking about to guide me. So it's absolutely irrelevant whether people acknowledge the patent or not from our perspective long term, because acknowledgement can be forced. Okay. And if the patent is valid, and if infringement does occur and you don't acknowledge it, all you do is compound your expenses. It's guaranteed. If you don't acknowledge a patent and you're infringing, and you know the patent is there, then that infringement is called willful infringement, and that's punished in the U.S. and many other developed countries, and it's punished by a pretty harsh penalty as well. That punishment is called punitive damages, and a court of law can award up to 3 times extra damages for willfully infringing. Now, a business person would simply weigh how much would it cost to negotiate a license with this guy versus how much it will cost to litigate it out versus how much it will cost to just ignore it. And honestly, ignoring it is probably always going to be the most expensive way to go, unless you think the patent is invalid. But if you're a public company, or if you're a company that has institutional investors, or even worse, if you're a public company with institutional investors and you decide to ignore it, well, then you may be pushing your luck, because now you have to deal with, the patent law and the potential of infringement and increased expenses. You'd have to deal with the regulations that say that you should notify regulatory bodies of, material risks that may occur. And you have investors who say, I would like to know if there are material risks. So if you simply ignore it, that's a management judgment. But if you ignore something that was a material risk, and then that material risk turns out to be an actual material problem, then you've opened yourself up to a lot more litigation, potential litigation, liabilities, risk, etc. Beef. It's simply not worth it, especially since it's just an expense of doing business. I always use Amazon as an example. You start a website, you go and pay Amazon to list your content on AWS, Amazon Web Services. Nobody thinks Amazon's going to put you out of business. You use their property, you pay them for the use of their property. You don't go out of business, the world doesn't collapse, etc. If you don't pay them, what happens? You don't have access to their property anymore. If you need their property to do business, you shot yourself in the foot. For what reason? I don't know.
Okay, so, all right, I'm to the beginning of what you said in regards to people don't understand the space. What is what is the space that you're talking about? Are we talking about like traditional business, revenue model structure of like that side? Because now, granted, we kind of operate in two different lanes of what's going on in the crypto side of things, where you are on the more business side of the stuff, and I'm more of like the guy out here in the whatever. And so
I don't know if I agree with that. I think I'm pretty staunchly set in the crypto side. It's just that I have a business side of me, a traditional business side of me. Like I said, I've been in crypto since 2013. I've created most of the stuff that we're talking about, literally. So, it's hard to say that I'm not, in the crypto side if you're discussing DeFi, and I created DeFi and patented it 8-9 years ago.
All right, let me reframe and not make it sound like I'm saying you're an outsider.
I'm not being sensitive. I'm just trying to make the distinction that you don't have to, and sorry to cut you off there. There's a delay. So I'm trying to make the distinction that, it's not old school versus new school. It's just prudent business practices. That's all. I'm not the earliest in crypto because I was in here in 2008 and 2009, but I was staunchly fully involved in 2013. And I created a platform that, is probably the most profitable platform in all of crypto. That doesn't mean I ignore things like checking for ownership of IP or doing due diligence or risk analysis or profit projections or DCF or everything else. Business is business and math is math. And math doesn't go out the window simply because we're dealing with blockchain.
So I'm going to reframe it regardless in that there are different segments with the overall community within the overall space. And in that frame, I would say I'm not in the same quote lane as you because I'm not operating on that kind of business level. Granted, this is business within the crypto thing, not just people who are being speculative about trading, whatever. But where I was going was when you say people don't understand the space, and making the distinction, people don't understand the business side of the space versus just the what's going on in the, I don't want to say speculative part of the community, because at a certain point, this wasn't about, let me chase the bag. I do feel like we definitely moved that way really heavy over the years, but whatever. The idea of, yes, there are standard rules in how businesses and jurisdictional laws are supposed to apply in. But the point of where I was going was that I would argue that for what seems like things are what's going on in the crypto blockchain space is there's just a lot of experimentation. And the experimentation is finally being caught up by like the regulatory side of it. But it's still one of those like, oh, well, we're just going to come up with a rule that fits the traditional model of what we understand like in a top-down structure. If that makes sense as far as how business is set up, but then like if it's a tech business, how we traditionally look at how software is distributed or software is created. Are you getting where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I think I do. I'm not sure if I agree with it because the concepts that I think people don't understand They do understand the concepts, but they don't understand that the concepts are not new to crypto. There's been a myth that's been formed that if you do things through crypto, all the other rules of life, disappear. You no longer have to die. You'll be young forever. The most beautiful woman would love you and kiss you all over if that's what you're into, et cetera, et cetera. And those things may be the case, but they're not going to happen because you're in a crypto. For instance, the concept of property ownership. Everybody understands property. I guarantee you understand the basic tenets of property. Tell me you don't, and I'll say, send me your private keys over to all your crypto right now. You can do it through Signal, encrypted. I'll wait. Go ahead, send it.
All right. So
exactly. So
right.
That's what I thought.
Now, I understand. I am making the pushback on certain points, right? But it's just the thing of we having these back and forth things so other people can listen on this, right? So go ahead, one of the things
I want a universal discussion because I want to capture all points.
Right. One of the things that I think for how technology works out is that it changes your operational environment. So, for example, when it costs how much, couple $100,000 to get a computer in the early days versus the cost of down, it got distributed out more. People started coming up with, by having more access to it, then you start a whole new set of ways to be able to use the technology, right? And as far as this is concerned, I kind of lost where I was running with that one.
Let me see if I can finish. Let me see if I can finish that thought for you. So basically, you're describing Moore's law, where you have a decrease in the cost of production of productive technology, okay? And you have the network effect, where the network effect means that the more people use the network, the more valuable the network is. The more valuable the network is, the more people that use the network, okay? That's not new, though, all right? That didn't start with crypto. It didn't start with computers. You go all the way back to telephones, to cars, to horse and buggies. The more people that use things, the cheaper the unit cost of those things were in terms of production and sale, and the larger the network. Okay, so people standardize on cars or planes or boats or horse and buggies, the steam engine, the railroads, etc. That's not new. A perfect example is, let's use DAOs or the DeFi projects, such as Compound or MakerDAO or any of these projects, okay? These projects aren't new in terms of business models. They're just software as a service companies, okay? The difference is because they're new, okay, the competition is not as high as it would be once they're mature, and the fixed and variable costs are different. So they're software as a service companies, but instead of having to onboard their own server infrastructure or license it out to AWS or Microsoft Azure, they outboard it or contract it out to the blockchain for free. So their margins are higher because they don't have to pay for the server farms and X, Y, and Z and connectivity. The blockchain takes care of most of that in the back end. So you're going to have an expansion of margins, but as more competition comes on board, those margins shrink, not because the blockchain gets more expensive to use, but because more companies come on board, more competition comes on board, more services are offered, and then more people are fighting for that pie. So think of a SaaS, a software as a service entity like Salesforce is a perfect example, okay, or Google Docs, etc. Okay, now Microsoft Office through OneDrive, and then think about all that backend storage and infrastructure being put on the blockchain. So basically, you're just the major expense of these companies now. These DeFi companies is basically writing and deploying code, and the code is very easy to deploy. So it's basically writing and debugging code. Okay, but that's still a business, and that's a business model that's been around for decades.
So, okay.
Hold for 1 second. I'm going to admit two people in to the what you call it, the Zoom discussion, to get a little back and forth here. So Coco and Patrick, come up on board. Now, I didn't screen, so I hope we don't have any idiots in. So I believe I know Coco. We have these three in. You're up to speak if you want. So ask a question to Chuck or myself. Give you a few seconds. After that, we'll move on. iPhone, Patrick, Coco. Okay, fair enough. Okay, go ahead, iPhone. You mute it if you don't realize it.
Might be on the delay.
Okay, go ahead, Trent.
So where I was going was the idea of the medium that you're able to do whatever the function is, as it builds out, that opens up how you're able to, it opens up your operational environment for how you're able to create either new products or service. That's going with that thing as far as the open. See, now you have me being conscious about saying the word open source.
There's nothing wrong with open source. Open source means, well, it's a variety of meanings, but basically it means that you're allowing other people to use your code contingent upon X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z are variables. They're not constants, okay? And here's one big secret about open source that everybody's learning. If you do give it away for free and let everybody use it for free, you can't charge for it and make money. Okay, a lot of people think that companies who offer open source are successful because of open source. No, that's not true. They're successful because of something else, and open source was a tool that they used. Okay, and open source is a way to proliferate technology and ideas quickly, both the good ideas and the bad ideas. For instance, early open source code that contained my patented technology was proliferated throughout the industry because it was open source and people felt they didn't have to write their own code. But they never bothered to check to see if that open source contained something that didn't belong to the people that offered it, which it did. So it belonged to me. And then now Veritaseum's patented technology is worked throughout all of DeFi. You know, I always tell the story. You have Veritaseum do an ICO, then you have Bancor, an Israeli company, do an ICO with a pricing algorithm that basically allows for swaps that infringe upon our IP. I'm not saying they did it on purpose, so I'm not accusing. I'm just giving factoids along a historical course of events. And then a dude from Brooklyn came, forked that with a $100,000 grant, created a Uniswap. Uniswap lagged for a while, then became very popular. And then that was forked by SushiSwap, right? A guy named Nomi Chef saw that, forked it, created SushiSwap, stole Uniswap's liquidity. And then a guy from Binance, a couple of guys from Binance said that looked like a good idea. They went and forked SushiSwap, created PancakeSwap, used Binance liquidity. So now Veritaseum's IP is not only in Veritaseum, but it's also in Bancor, it's also in SushiSwap, it's also in Uniswap, and it's also in PancakeSwap. We didn't have to write 6 things. Everybody just copied code and copied it over and over and over. The same thing goes with Ethereum, on-demand liquidity, RippleNet, the Lightning Network on Bitcoin, Solana, you know, it goes on. So there's open source code is not free just because you don't pay an upfront cost for it. And you can make it much more expensive than it needs to be if you don't bother to check it and do due diligence on it. You know, does the entity that offered the open source code own the IP behind it? Nobody seems to care. Nobody checks. And that's no problem if you're a hobbyist developer. But once you start putting tens of millions, or hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars into projects, it really does matter.
Okay,
imagine building a whole city and some 12-year-old kid owns it.
I said this to you the other day. I said, what happens? Because again, at this point, we're seeing how the regulation stuff is coming into play. And that was always one of the things that got me with the regulation stuff was it was the off-ramp things that would be regulated. But I haven't seen anything that specifically goes at the technology. And as I understand the patent doesn't quote like regulate control, but it just says, hey, here's a process, this system, this is my idea IP wise, right? So I'm making that distinction. But I had said to you, like, what would happen? What do you think if they made an exemption in how to implement patent infringement within the cryptos? Because like you acknowledge that there's a lot of money moving in right now, and X amount of the companies that are bigger name right now are connected to other more traditional people in the background, or companies in the background. And arguably there's that fight of how do we still keep our incumbent position with these new companies at least how I'm looking at it, as the face of this new blockchain crypto movement thing called DeFi.
Mm-hmm. The best way to do it is not to make that, unavoidable mistakes in the beginning. Just because patents are given and administered by the government doesn't mean that it's the same as other parts of the government. So regulation and patents have nothing to do with each other. Patents are controlled by patent law, okay? And most regulations are controlled by whatever law covers said regulation, such as securities regulation is controlled by securities law. Patent law and securities law, to my layman's interpretation at least, have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Patent law is law protecting personal property. So the law that says you own the title to your car or you own the title to your house has much more to do with patent law than, securities regulation or FinCEN or et cetera. So, just have to keep that in mind. And patent law is enforced by courts. So if you steal my car and I catch you from a civil perspective and I want my car back, I sue you in court. Now you could go to jail too, because it's against the law, grand theft auto. But if I want the car back, I want civil remedies, then I'll bring you to court and sue you civilly for the value of the car, potentially for damages and, whatever else I had to go through to go be without my car and get the car back. So don't confuse and mix and match, regulation and patents. A patent essentially is a license to sue somebody who takes your property. That's what a patent is.
All right, so then I guess it kind of throws the second question I had out the window, because there's going on cases on
you have low bandwidth, so I don't know if you could do anything about it, but you're breaking up, and there's a red warning on the lower left-hand corner. So
what's fun? Yeah, the phone only one on the system right now, so it shouldn't be this bad. All right.
And on that note, while he's taking care of that, iPhone or Coco and James, I'm letting James in. If you have anything to add, anyone else who wants to speak, you can request. I haven't been screening. Please be respectful. Don't make me shut this down. Let's see if anybody on space as well. Trevor's taking care of his bandwidth issue. No request to speak on Twitter. So this would be read only on Twitter. Anybody who wants to request to speak, come in through the YouTube channel. Okay. So you were saying.
All right. Sorry, I was asking if the person on Twitter, Twitter Spaces wanted to ask anything. I guess they're not hearing me right now. It might be the delay thing. So where's I going just now? So law enforcement as far as like policies and stuff versus the patent side, two different sides of the house as you're seeing it. So is that an app? Okay. Considering how things have been going in the crypto space, is that an absolute to say things that happen on the legal side as far as, the SEC or FinCEN after some money, that's not going to influence any part of how patent law is enforced?
I don't see a connection. I mean, again, I'm not a legal expert at all, but I unfortunately not fortunately, unfortunately, have spent much more than my fair share of time in legal disputes, court, etc. So I do know my way as a layperson around. Now they do intersect. For instance, let's suppose that my patent covers the use of blockchains. Okay, many blockchains, some blockchains, and the SEC goes after a blockchain development company, decides that they did XYZ wrong. They go to court. The blockchain company settles instead of going to court, or they go to court and there's a judgment, and then they disgorge assets from that blockchain company. Well, I believe, as a layperson and not a skilled lawyer, and learned lawyer without a law degree, that the SEC has infringed upon my patent and owes me royalties upon the use of the patent. And if they know about the patent, which I'm pretty sure they do, because that was a point of contention with us, they may owe, depending on if the judge believes, what the judge has to say, punitive plus compensatory damages. So you do see, a crisscross, but it's not a connection. As a matter of fact, it's running to the opposite of what you're alluding to, where the regulatory body itself infringed upon a patent and going after the crypto industry. Because in order to get that capital, it has to get the capital through a device that's been patented by somebody else who just happens to be in the blockchain.
I wasn't going that way, but yeah, that.
Go ahead.
I was saying I wasn't going that way in regards to how the regulatory body was infringing. Okay, so I think it was Uniswap has a class action lawsuit going on with some people who are basically like saying, hey, the company didn't do due diligence and we got some rug pulls and there was some security issues. Now, why I kind of made the connection in my head about that was because usually that's part of the financial innovation cycle, as Simon Dixon used that, where when enough of the public complains about something, the regulatory folks come in. And what got my attention in that particular case was they were arguing Uniswap, or what is it, something labs, didn't do their due diligence, which I think goes into your of these companies that are using the patent for distributed technologies haven't done their due diligence to know, or aren't publicly putting it out that they did due diligence to know about the patent. And I think, at least for how I'm looking at like how this space has been going with the lawsuits popping up more and more, there might be some kind of crossover if enough people are doing either class action lawsuits, that at some point, like there's some level of crossover where it's going to have to come up that there was a patent on this stuff. This is also another issue that is on the plate for them. Aside from that, the people are suing them about losing money. That's a whole nother thing. But at least in this layman's brain, because I'm not a lawyer, if more of these kind of cases come up and they're starting to name the same people that you're naming in your Dow report, I would think that there's some level of crossover where somebody on the lawyer side is going to be like, well, there's this patent and they automatically violated that. Like, let's start making these other connections.
I agree with that, but and there's always a but, right?
Okay.
I'm not well versed in a lawsuit. I just skimmed over it. I personally don't think it's a good lawsuit because it is implying, it's not even implying, it's outright saying that this is some type of regulated entity, with this being Uniswap, an exchange that is regulated and should have done due diligence when it listed assets to sell or IPO. And Uniswap is a piece of software. It's a smart contract with an interface. Okay, it is not the New York Stock Exchange. It's not Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. So it's not a broker dealer, right? It's not a listed exchange. It's software that allows for peer-to-peer transactions. Okay, I believe that's my belief. Now, it's not decentralized because it's not decentralized. It's just not. If it was, then they wouldn't be able to be sued, now would they? Okay.
Right.
Nothing else is decentralized either. So it's not just Uniswap. Then nothing's decentralized. I discussed several times. We have a spectrum, centralized here, decentralized there, and then everything else sits somewhere on that spectrum. Close to the one side or the other. Nothing is pure. Um, Now, whether that lawsuit succeeds or not is one thing, but they're getting sued by their users. There's a potential defense with that with the terms of service. If you agree to a terms of service that says you won't sue and we're listing XYZ, this is what we are, and you admit this is what we are, then, I think that's a pretty strong defense. Of course, in many states, New York being one of them, the benefit of the doubt is given to the entity that didn't draw the contract up. That would be those who use Uniswap versus Uniswap itself, who drew the contract up. But my case, or not my case, but my perspective is different from IP. The lawsuits are going to come from, if they do come from, they're going to come from the patent holder. Okay, if they do come, they're also going to come from the stakeholders, the investors, because they're going to. Uniswap is funded by large VC companies, Union Square Ventures, Coinbase Ventures, Bain Capital, and the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, if I'm not mistaken. No, not BCG. Union Square Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz A16Z. Four big, very experienced, very wealthy, powerful venture capital firms who know their stuff. They've been doing this for decades. Okay. For whatever reason, they decided to do it without an IP search, which boggles my mind because they would never decide to open up a semiconductor fabrication plant or invest in a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company or a chip maker or any other technical pursuit without checking to see if the people they invested in own the IP that they were selling. But for whatever reason, they decided to do it with crypto.
Okay,
And,
so, okay. Hold on.
they have access to the deepest lawyers. So why wasn't it done? But here's the rub. They do invest, right? They invest in a DAO without a legal liability wrapper, a legal liability limitation wrapper, basically a corporation, a company, or limited liability partnership, etc. They get sued by a patent holder. If that patent holder wins, then everybody's susceptible to joint and several liability, which means you can invest 45 cents, but if someone wins a lawsuit judgment for $400 million, you, Trek, are on the hook for $400 million, despite the fact you only put 45 cents in, right? That is a negative 100 million times return. It's pretty rough, right?
It is, but I want to throw a little distinction on something. So what you described is here's what we see as like, this is how it's supposed to go. If you're an investment fund, you end up doing X amount of due diligence in order to push forward on something. Now, I do think that the blockchain crypto industry is this basically just experiment phase. And yes, there are traditional policies, traditional laws, traditional supposed to quote follow a level of traditional norm that we understand, but it's still kind of opened out to where we're still seeing like, we follow this particular rule a certain way, do we inch it in, do we make certain changes on it? And the reason why I bring that distinction up is because there have been a number of cases, and I'm going to talk about banks specifically, traditional finance of like a JP Morgan, HSBC, sovereign, like those level banks, where they've done business practices that arguably everyone, when the court case gets announced and things happen, it's like, well, of course that was illegal. Of course they shouldn't have done that. They end up doing it, and then they go to court for doing it, and majority of the time they pay some level of a fine, and then they just go right back to everyday business. No one goes to jail. And in looking at it that way, I kind of wonder, is that how some of these companies are looking at it, where it's like, well, we'll go as long as we can until we get law actually comes in and says, hey, cut the crap out, you did the infringement, blah, 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 blah.
See, in patent law is civil at the federal level. It is not criminal. So, the patent holder doesn't, well, I can't tell if patent holders want people to go to jail or not. They may, but as far as I know, incarceration is not a remedy. Okay. But civil fines are, and they could be pretty steep. The law firm that represents me won a $460 million settlement offer from a big tech company. This was a settlement. This is what the company voluntarily paid to avoid going to court, because it felt obviously going to court was going to hit it a lot harder. And they've done this more than once. If you take a look at, if you Google Wells Fargo versus USAA, USAA paid a technology consulting firm a few dollars to create an app that allowed you to scan checks, and those scan checks will get deposited directly into your account. And then if you notice, a lot of banks use that, but they use it without USA's permission. So USA sued them, what, $250-something million. Okay, I think $100-something million in compensatory damages, and then another $100-something million or $200 million in punitive damages for knowingly and willfully infringing. Okay, now these settlements are not one-time offers. Okay, you have a license and you pay for the license as long as you use the infringed product.
Okay, so but that's what I'm saying though. You pay the fine and then you just end up going back to doing business. But you run as far as you can.
Hold for 1 second.
Mm-hmm. All right, so sorry. If anybody is out there on the YouTube live stream, on the Twitter side spaces, definitely share. If you got a question, we really would appreciate you jumping in to expand this conversation with more voices and more thoughts about the patent that Reggie has, that is here within the US jurisdiction. There's a whole patent number and everything in case you didn't know. And he has a tweet that he just pushed out over the weekend, and I can't share right now. Can I share? If I can share. Nope, I can't share it right now. But basically he had a tweet over the weekend that pretty much tagged like a number of the known blockchain crypto companies in the space, between the front companies who are the exchanges, as well as the DAOs, and then the companies that are backing these DAOs. So arguably everyone's on notice because social media now becomes a prudent way to legally buy people about things. And in the report that Reggie did, he actually broke down a couple of different law cases that used the example of how social media was the tool used to notify people publicly about stuff. And at this point, whatever size company you are, like there is a social manager who has to sit there, or not sit there, but when you're tagged in a post, the social media manager notices it. So even if the work is contracted out, at some point, someone had to say something to the higher up person to be like, hey, we got tagged in this thing. Like, what do I do with it? But that's at least how I'm looking at it. Nonetheless, sorry, as you were about to say.
Okay, I'm back. Your screen is okay. So my apologies. It's an emergency call from my daughter. Tell me about this.
All right.
So where we leave off?
No, so I was saying about like what we've seen, how banks operate, where they'll do something up until the point until the law comes in and says, hey, you did this wrong thing. Here's, a fine unless we take you to court. And you were making the distinction that patent law is a civil side versus X amount of the financial things are criminal level stuff. So different kind of application of repercussions. But I'm still wondering, and granted, I've not talked to none of these people. I don't know any of the people, like a boss, a co-founder, whatever. I don't know any of these people, and I'm not the legalese side person you've been saying. But I do wonder if this is the pattern of behavior that is being pushed over to the space when you look at the way that the money's moving in and the way that the companies are operating. Is it just going to keep going until the law catches up and then like hits us to say, stop doing what you're doing or pay this fine?
Okay. Well, the laws they're already, if you take a look at total return systems, TRS, they've already given explicit notice, direct notice. They've published it. They've drawn up the actual legal motions, order to show cause for MakerDAO and for Compound DAO. They're obviously quite serious. So the law is knocking at the door right now. Now, you can avoid all that simply by making a deal with the guy who owns a patent. You know, guys who own patents want to make money one way or the other. Some of them want to make money because they have a business, they patented it, and they don't want other people encroaching on their business. That's one way to make money. Another way to make money is they invented something, they're willing to let other people use it, but they say, we don't want you using it for free because I couldn't create it for free. So you could use it if you pay for it. And then there's a third set of entities who simply want to use their invention without other people using it, without the competition being able to use their own invention against them. And so what they do is they request a court to forbid, or they forbid other people or other entities from using their invention. So let's suppose JP Morgan is using something that Robert Smith patented, okay? Robert Smith proved JP Morgan's infringing, and he's looking for an injunction to block them from the market. He can get that. That's his prerogative because it's his. You know, so JP Morgan, it's not their right to use it, okay? They have an option to use it at the behest of the patent holder. So, you know, unlike the regulatory stuff, Robert Smith can literally just lock JP Morgan out of it if he has the capital to fight it out. If it's a very, very powerful patent, he'll have the capital because money begets money. Now, there are certain patents that even the patent holder, the property holder themselves, cannot exclude the country from using. And those are things that are necessary for the safe and health, the safety and the health and well-being of the country. So if suppose you patented the cure for COVID, which I think it was patented, right, using an mRNA method, you can't deny other manufacturers or the U.S. from using it because the U.S. government would say, well, this is a health and safety hazard, so it's for the best interest of the country as a whole. So they will compel you to license it. But that's called compulsory licensing, and that's done at market rates. So you don't have to feel sorry for the guy. It's not like he's going to go into the poorhouse, but he cannot exclude the U.S. from using the COVID cure. Again, from my layman's perspective, I'm not a lawyer and haven't passed the bar, but you know what Jay-Z said, 99 problems though, right? You know, I haven't passed the bar, but I know a little bit, enough that I wouldn't let you illegally search my what, you know, so.
Exactly. Sorry about the light situation just now. Hold on. Okay, that does a little bit.
Any other questions or comments? And I let a few people up in the chats, but I haven't heard anybody. Alien is up. Alien, you're up. Unmute your mic. Speak up. You know, nobody has answered, so it's obviously on my side. Alien, we can't hear you. Your mic is not muted, but I don't hear you at all. Can you hear Alien on your side?
I can't hear anything.
Okay. Alien?
Okay.
Okay. Well, I don't hear anybody, so we'll go on. If Alien or anybody else who came up on board, if you feel you can get on board, please do. So any other questions or comments? We could discuss a tweet that I sent out. I think that's very interesting. I think all my
Yeah,
tweets are interesting, but
actually,
obviously I'm a bit biased, right?
yeah, I didn't want to jump on that one about the tweet. So when you had stepped away for a second, I was talking about that as far as the whole thing of tagging people in and social media being used as a public notice forum, and making the point that like all of the companies named on here have a social media person who has this had to come across them seeing that it was done, and as they had to say something to the higher up above them. At least that's how I'm looking at it.
As I understand it, even if they didn't say anything up, if you've been noticed, you've been noticed. So, it's like, well, the chicks, that dog ate my homework. The teacher doesn't want to hear that. You knew what the homework was, you should have did it. So.
Okay, so, all right, how do I want to approach?
On that note, let me make clear, hopefully it should be obvious to everybody who's in the crypto industry and actually wants to see this industry flourish. I am not litigious at all. I don't want to put anybody else down, trying to put myself up, but I've been through a lot just to stay in this industry, much, much more than many others. Bashed, beaten, reputation defamed by the SEC, refused capital by professional investors, on and on and on, hack, sim swap, the whole nine. I'm still here going on. I still stand behind those who stood behind me, even when there is no legal obligation to do so, definitely no profit model built in. And so, I'm here. And I have not sued anybody. Been sued, but have not sued anybody. So I'm not litigious. That patent troll mantra is a boogeyman story designed to mislead people who are easily misled, and avoiding the guys who really are the threat to the industry from a autonomous entrepreneurial perspective. I'm going to leave that there, but there's much more to be said in the future, and that's going to be coming up. And also, with that being said, just because I'm not litigious, and just because I am very, very highly in favor of, strong in favor of meritorious competition, that doesn't mean that I will create something and slave for now, 9 years and running to get it up and coming, up and going, and then to have other people make hundreds of millions and billions of dollars off of it for free. Well, I don't. That's not how Reggie Middleton's world works in capitalism. If it's mine, I have no problem with others using it as long as it doesn't cripple my business, but you have to pay for its use. If it's something I designed for my sole use only, then I designed it for my use solely, and it's mine. If anybody has a problem with that, you could go invent your own stuff, and then you could do with it as you wish. Okay? Just like I should have the same right to do with my property as I wish. So you could take your house and you can rent it out to dog catchers and be, hive keepers and whoever you wish to do it with, or not rent it out to anybody, or let everybody in there for free. You do that because it's your property. Okay, so all I ask is for people to be cognizant that I should be allowed to do what I wish with my property as well. And I think that is the tenet of capitalism. So I've talked a lot, and it's interesting how I can't get anybody to speak.
Yeah, everyone can be in the chat part, thumbing it out. But it would be 100% better of a conversation if y'all jumped in on this live stream with us, whether it be on the Twitter Spaces side or if you just jumped in on the YouTube side. That way we can get more going and, share the understanding.
Quite a few people have tried to come in on the Zoom side. It looks like there's a technical issue because 6 or 7 people tried to come in and I don't hear anything. So there must be a problem. I cobbled this together at the last minute.
Okay. So we should have scheduled it out better then.
Yeah.
Next
Keep
time,
that on a
next
long
time.
list of other things I should have did better, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and yeah, it definitely. I will take my part in this because I knew I was gonna have this conversation with you, and I could have definitely said some more stuff over the weekend about this coming up. But I don't want to take up more of your time. I know you got things to do. Like I'm moving around up here too in New York, so time is not just freely floating. The basic idea, what I would like to leave out to the folks on the YouTube side, on the Twitter side, is what I would like to do here is have more of a conversation about what is going on with this patent that Reggie holds and expand it to other voices in the space. So you're pleased with how this first interaction has gone, and we know a little bit more how to build on it better going forward. I'm hoping that we could definitely expand and amplify this out into the space more to help yield desired results.
Okay.
Oh,
I see Alien has raised his hand,
yes.
but okay, you start video later. Hello, Alien, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Reggie?
Yes, I can. Okay, someone finally broke in. Okay.
So you put out a document lately that was really fascinating, talking about DAOs. I was wondering.
Hold for 1 second, Alien. I can hear you, but I can't understand you because your mic is breaking up. So move closer to the mic if you can.
How's that? Is that a little better?
It's a little better. Go ahead.
So you put out a document lately that was fascinating about DAOs and the risk involved with DAOs. And one of the things that you talked about in DAOs is DAOs believe code is law. Can you go into a little bit deeper dive about code is law and why that's a big risk for DAOs?
Again, that's a short conversation. Code is code. Law is law. The end. That's just about it. I'm pretty sure. Say it again.
Why do so many DAOs make the mistake of confusing code with law?
Hold 1 second. It is very difficult for me to hear you. So if it's hard for me to hear you, it's probably even harder for the community. So try again. Move your mic closer to your mouth and turn the gain up on the mic to maximum if you can.
Why do so many DAOs make the mistake of thinking that code is law?
I can't really make it out. So I think you're asking why are so many DAOs making that mistake? I have to guess that's what you said. You try it one more time.
That's exactly what I said.
Well, better yet, if you have a cell phone, use your cell phone to dial in, because that usually works very clearly. You want to try that?
Yeah, I'll try that.
That's actually what he said. Why are DAOs making that mistake of confusing code?
You know, the reason I could only speculate, but I believe that the reason is because DAOs primarily were created and conceptualized by software developers, and software developers are humans, and humans are more comfortable with what they're familiar with. So software developers are familiar with software code, and so software code is what they use to lay down the rule, the law for what they did. The problem is the semantics, the terminology. Code may be the rules, but the code is not law. You know, law is law. And I'm sure a judge is going to disagree with many people when people say code is law. They're like, I'm sorry, but, you know, the US code is law, or, you know, the New York CPLR, civil rules of the CPLR. That's the civil rules of civil procedure. Well, you get the point, right? I'm not a lawyer, but law is law. Now, you run into a problem when you don't understand that law is law and code is code, because you think the code is a law. And if you haven't thought it through, you can see where there's a lot of issues. Let's take the DAO, the original DAO, when they got hacked in 2017, I think, or was it 2016? 2016. Was that a hack? But do you think that the DAO infiltration, was that a hack? I'm asking you, Trey.
I don't
Oh,
think it was.
okay. No, it's not. It wasn't a hack. It
What
wasn't a
was
hack.
it?
It was in the code.
Well,
But hold on now, hold on. I want to jump back to the thing that you just said about it was the devs who pushed that narrative of code is law. I don't think that was the case. I think it was the marketing people. Like,
well,
I've
back then
looked
there
at
was
this.
no marketing people. Back
I
then the
would
devs were
argue
everything, the
different.
marketing people, the
I would
finance people, and everything
definitely
else.
argue different on that. I would so argue different on that because if you read the block size war, and granted, I was in the space at that time, but I totally was not paying attention to the more technical dev side of Bitcoin and the whole thing of like expanding the size and stuff. But like everyone else, I saw X amount of the stuff related to like what was making it into the news or what was making it into YouTube and stuff. And it wasn't until reading a book that I started to understand that there was X amount of effort put into how do we make this look in public. There were marketing, there were branding people there. It isn't the same like that it is now with X amount of the companies now, but there were then creating narratives and they used certain social media touch points to push out the narrative a certain way. And so code being law, especially around the whole Vitalik camp, like that wasn't Vitalik's thought. That was the people who how to get the community to like accept that we're going to make this change. But then when it was being pushed, devs or coders are horrible at selling stuff. They make stuff, they make software, that's what they do. People, they can be the most flyest person ever, but they're horrible at actually selling their stuff in that marketing branding way. I look at the space now, and over these years, I see it more now than I did back then when I first got in. But I also know more people in the space.
Okay. I see where you're coming from, and I don't disagree with it as you portrayed it, but there's always a but. Code still ain't law. So,
Oh, no, okay.
The Vel pushing it,
Not
Adele pushing it, Marvin Gall pushing it. Everybody pushed it but the lawyer, right?
It was some lawyers out there taking some nice checks, especially in New York. You know what I'm talking about. But
and how did that turn out for them?
I mean, I haven't heard of anybody going to jail who was taking those checks back then.
Well, it's not about going to jail, right? But well, I don't want to blow up certain names, so I'm not going to name names. But at the end of the day, law is written by Congress and it's enforced by the judicial arm. So the legislative arm writes law, the judicial arm, I'm sorry, it doesn't enforce it. The legislative arm writes law, the judicial arm adjudicates the law. And supposedly the administrative arm enforces the law. My personal experience has shown me that that's not necessarily the case. Where the administrative arm may not necessarily enforce it. They may enforce it selectively, but more energy goes into picking winners and losers than actually meritoriously and fairly enforcing it. But that's been my personal experience. And I may be wrong. And again, I'm a layperson who's been burned. So I don't have I do believe I have an objective view on it, but most people who are overly subjective think they're objective, which is a problem. So I'm aware of that. So I'm going off on a rant now, trying to make a thinly veiled jab at an entity that I don't favor. So moving on now, with the code is law, all that is irrelevant because laws control the DAO. You have laws on liability, limited liability, corporations, partnerships, the joint and several liability of an unincorporated partnership, et cetera. All that applies, and there hasn't been any precedents yet, but that's being tested right now, or will be tested very, very soon, like within weeks. And it's just not necessary. Why do you want to be the first one to experiment with your own stakeholders' money? It's something that's easy to see coming, or should have been easy to see coming. The other code is all aspects or the inability to serve a DAO or DAO has no jurisdiction, that's nonsense. I'm sure a New York judge is going to disagree with anybody who does business in New York as to whether New York has jurisdiction or not. If you do business in New York, most judges are like, well, we have jurisdiction. If you do business in the United States at the federal level, most courts in the US will most likely say the US has jurisdiction. You gave the US jurisdiction when you came here and asked people here to give you money. That would be my layman's interpretation and experience. And I don't think it would be proven wrong, but again, what do I know? I'm just a dad. Okay. Now, let's discuss before we go, though, the tweet from yesterday, which I thought was going to, be a groundswell of discussion, but nobody's saying anything. Do you give you a quick impression of what the tweet was and what it was about, Trek or Alien?
Alien, do you want to say?
Yeah, Alien was having some bandwidth issues.
Can you guys hear me now? Is that better?
That is much better. That is much better.
So, Reggie, what was the question?
The tweet that I put out yesterday, if anybody saw it, on Ethereum. Any comments on it? Questions, criticisms?
Are you talking about the tweet where your IP touches 70% of crypto projects?
Yeah, that was the last slide, and there were 4 slides in it. The first slide was an explanation of how the IP interacts with Ethereum. First, second, and third slides.
So the question is, would you go into a deeper dive of how Ethereum as a protocol may infringe on your intellectual property?
Okay. Oh, that's a deep discussion, but the swapping of values, exchanging of values to compensate miners is one way that we believe it does. That's conditional transfer of value between 2 or more asymmetric key pairs. Okay. Fancy talk of saying we're sending basically like a swap. We're sending value from point A to point B. Okay. Wallet to wallet, contingent upon C. And Ethereum does that. And Ethereum does that in a way that it didn't do at its launch, and in a way that squarely lands directly on the explanations made in the patent.
Follow up, Reggie.
Excuse me?
So follow-up question, if go ahead and finish your thought, and then I'll follow up with another question.
Okay. And as I was telling Trek, there is not nearly as much original thought in the industry as I think a lot of people think there is. Someone does something and they're successful, or they get a lot of uptake and traction, and other entities come and simply fork that, copy it, and they add their own flavor to it. They may build it up, they may improve it significantly, but the basis was still someone else's IP. If that initial IP that was forked is infringing on someone else's property, then you're basically taking that infringed IP and you're sucking it into your own organization. If that organization gets forked, and it goes further and further and further. So you can see it is very, very easy for this to spread throughout the entire industry. Way past crypto into traditional finance, industrial manufacturing, et cetera. I believe that's where we stand now. So validator incentivization or validator payment doesn't exist just in Ethereum. It exists in Cardano and the Bitcoin, in the Lightning Network. It exists in Binance Chain and Binance Smart Chain and Solana and on and on and on. Almost all the Ethereum competitors. So again, this is a concept, a DeFi concept, or a peer-to-peer capital markets concept that I think is prevalent.
Okay.
So that's how I land my plane on that. Go ahead.
So Trek, can I jump in with a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
So one of the big pushbacks that we've been getting in the Veritasium DAO is that the timeline issue. And I think you addressed that, Reggie, in your tweet. There are a lot of people that don't know much about patent law and how it works. And there are a lot of people that say, well, Reggie did some brilliant things. He patented some brilliant ideas, but Ethereum was first. It predated Reggie Middleton's technology. Can you go over that timeline and tell folks why that is incorrect?
In general, I don't want to get into a timeline debate because that gets deep and non-productive, but it will answer your question. First of all, Ethereum doesn't predate my patent application. It just doesn't. Now, the idea of Ethereum predates the patent application filing. Might not predate the actual invention or the conception of the invention, but the white paper does come before the filing. But the white paper is not Ethereum. The white paper is a white paper. It does describe certain things in detail, other things it doesn't describe in detail, and other things it doesn't touch on at all. While something that is described in significant detail in the white paper, described to the point where it's to be considered enabling prior art, okay, that might not be infringing on a patent. But if you take a look at Ethereum, or at least the way Ethereum was described in 2013, 2014, and you take a look at Ethereum now, 2022, you have two very different and very distinct animals. Okay. And I didn't say, or I'm not alleging that there's a possibility that 2014, Ethereum didn't come into existence, but until 2015, or publicly in 2015. But I'm not saying 2013 or 2014 Ethereum infringes on a patent. I'm saying Ethereum infringes on the patent now. Okay. And I did actually put a timeline in the tweet to head off a lot of unnecessary discussion. But I don't want to get into a timeline discussion because that's not going to go anywhere. But it is a valid question for those who actually want to know what the facts are. So I have no problem answering that, but I'm not trying to get into a debate about it. So anybody who wants to see what the timeline is, just go to the tweet at Reggie Middleton. And it was also retweeted by at Veritasium Inc. And take a look at the first graphic from last night, and you'll see a complete description on what we feel about Ethereum. Now, if Ethereum infringes, okay, that would mean that all the applications and players and projects that use Ethereum to generate revenue, possibly and likely, in my layman's opinion, infringe as well. Now, this is being put out as pure research. One second. This is being put out as pure research. So it's not being put out as a legal threat, or I've seen some videos, Reggie Middleton trying to take down DeFi, which is ridiculous. If I allege to have created DeFi, why would I want to take DeFi down? You know, I don't know if any of you have children. Actually, I know both of you have children. If you have children and you love your children, why would you want to take your children out? So, you know, I actually love DeFi as my invention. I have no reason to take it out. So, but these ideas and mantras and, you know, allegations floating around are part and parcel of the immaturity of the industry that I was describing to you, Trent. It's just makes very little sense. But what I'm doing is I'm putting out research, and I'm putting out research to try and educate the community and the industry as a whole, because there is a massive amount of misunderstanding. And some of the errors that are being made are simply indescribable. Like both you and Arian asked, why are DAOs putting themselves up to so much risk unnecessarily? I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. I can't figure out for the life of me. So on that note now, I think you had a question, Trey. So go ahead, or a comment.
I'm still going to throw it out there that I think they're using the banking strategy of we're going to run until we come to a stop, and then we'll settle. All right, that's how much it costs here. Like, I really think there's still experimentation in how to use the technology to make different revenue models. And there's a whole other side of it. But
see, that theory, you know, you don't pay a settlement and that's it. The money that you pay is to make up for the 5 or 6 years that you've been using it and knew about it and didn't pay. So first you pay up that 5 or 6 years. So you pay that. Then you pay up to 3 times the amount you would have had to pay if you cooperated. And then you still got to pay every day
for the license deal.
Forward.
Right.
Say it again.
But if you make X amount of money and you did it when you were just experimenting, and once you reach whatever your 3 to 5 year window is of like, understand enough of the market now, because arguably this is X amount of data collection, and we have other types of revenue generation that we do, paying the, let's say, 900 million is nothing compared to what we're going to make in decades. And even if we deal with a license, like 3 decades, okay, whatever. Like, that's how I'm looking at it. And granted, I'm not in a CPA no guy, but if you know, hey, I'm gonna run into a part where, like, it, again, it falls into the MO of how banks seemingly operate. We know we're gonna deal with a fine, the X amount, and then we know that we'll pay out the X amount, but the bigger picture of how much we make, even after the fine, is gonna be okay for whatever the fine is. So be okay with the fine.
You're confusing the regulatory and the civil liability side, right? The fine is a percentage of how much you make. So the fine goes up by how much you make. You know, the regulators put a number on, and you're right. No regulator has ever driven a bank out of business, despite how foul the bank's error or purpose, willful bad act has been. But those are regulators. Suppose the patent holder says, I don't want you in the business anymore. So then how much do you make? 0 or negative, because you still have to pay for using the patented information before. So they get you for the 400 or 500 million or whatever. I'm picking a number, right? And then they say, we want an injunction to prevent you from using our patent invention ever again. Now, what does the bank do?
Figure out
now, here's how I think a seasoned executive would handle it. Take a spreadsheet. Column A is all the expenses of ignoring it. Column B is all the expenses of making a deal with them. Column C is all the expenses of fighting it, right? And column D would be all the expenses of being excluded from the industry. And then you add in a profit of each one of those efforts. You subtract the expenses from the profit, and you have a number at the bottom. You pick the biggest number. Voila. That's how you pick. That's how you decide what you do. The most profitable way. You don't, cut the head off a chicken, let it run around, and whatever square it falls on, that's what I'm going to do. The Santeria voodoo thing may be used, in certain Federal Reserve monetary bank circles, but there's a better way of doing it. And with patent law, it is possible to be excluded from the industry. It is the patent owner's property, and they're to do with it as they wish, unless it is something that is considered to be for the public good. Then it could be compelled to do it. That's compulsory licensing. Also, you're not allowed to do, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'm not a lawyer, you're not allowed to have draconian licensing for one party and not the other. So, whatever your license fee is within reason, it's your license fee. But there's nobody to force you to license XYZ. So I don't want this particular industry, or if I want to compete in this industry solely, then it's my invention and only I can use my invention. So I understand your perspective. Okay. I don't think it's quite the way it works. A lot of banks may assume or take the roll of the dice and say they're not going to go through with it, or they don't have the will or the resources to go through with it. But at this stage, I think that would be unlikely, especially somebody like me. If I've been doing it for 9 years, I went through all this, what incentive would I have to stop now? Zero. It makes no sense. If I'm going to stop, I would have stopped 9 years ago, okay? Or 4 years ago, where the SEC drug me down, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, this is the wrong time to stop.
So, all right. I don't know. I feel that we've definitely beat the horse to a certain degree, and ran down, right? And I'm not saying that to short you, but we have definitely been
beat. You're right. I agree with you. So,
right, we definitely went on for a substantial amount of time. I do want to bring up to folks, I did drop it in the chat in regards to the link to the Twitter post that was from over the weekend that has the 4 screenshots that he was talking about. Basically say, hey, here's how Ethereum touches what the patent does. Here's the ecosystem, that is the ETH ecosystem. That shows the different companies that are players within the ecosystem. And I just saw that with the gasoline companies. That's interesting. And then there's a last screen about the FAQs, frequently asked questions. This isn't just one stop. Alien 91, are you trying to say something? Okay. I don't know if it's the delay. Okay.
I don't know. No, I was on another screen. I don't know if you've got time, Trek, for another question, but I do have one more if you do have time.
Okay.
So, question for you, Reggie. I'm not going to name the project, but there are a lot of token holders in this certain project that have been pressing the principals in the project to go ahead and answer if there's any risk in the project because they're infringing on your intellectual property. And one of the tokens, in full disclosure, I'm a big token holder in this project. But there's an individual that was on a private chat in this project and said, please lead me to answer also if another project is infringing on my Theta investment. It's my right to be informed. The principal, who is one of the folks that founded this project, came back with this response. We have no reason to believe there is any merit to his patents and won't be doing anything about them unless there is evidence otherwise. It is painfully obvious that this is just Middleton's way of getting people to promote him by brigading the forum of every other crypto project. Normally, we never ban anyone unless they are scammers or verbally abusive to other users, but we can go ahead and make an exception and ban any user mentioning these patents again as a lesson to not brigade other projects to promote your own interests. The irony in this individual statement is this particular project owns 5 patents themselves. Can you go into a little depth about the thought process that there's no merit to your patents?
I don't believe it's a thought process because I don't believe any thought went into it, honestly. So it would be insulting the processes to call it a thought process. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think it is incorrect to say that the project owns 5 patents. I think that the principals in the project have filed and own the patents. The project doesn't own anything that I'm aware of, but I could be in error because I don't follow the project closely. I'm not going to name it because I'm not going to consider this a mudslinging contest. This is more of discussing basically facts. I'm not trying to brigade, but I don't have the time to, attack projects and talk trash about them. I do primarily right now, I've been doing primarily research and developing our own IP. I've been doing that for about 2 years now. Anybody who is a stakeholder in a project should be and is well in their rights to want to inquire if someone else's IP is being infringed upon, if that can affect their stake. It's a very, very, very valid question. And the management of that project responding in the way they did, in my opinion, took a lot of risk. If I had a big stake in that project, they'll be asking for a lawsuit. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes. We made a mistake. Okay, you made it. What are you going to do about it? That's how I would look at it. But if you say, we're not going to, we feel that the patent has no merit and we're not going to look at it until later. And if you ask again, we're going to ban you. That's not a prudent and that's not a responsible reply at all. You're opening yourself up to legal liability. You are. But I'm not a lawyer again, and I'm not a legal professional. So you take my legal opinion for exactly what you paid for. But put it this way. If that company or that entity or that project was sued, okay, and the patent did hold up and infringement was proven to be the case, now you have a significant problem. Okay, now token holders are not shareholders. Okay, they don't have equity rights, they don't have voting rights, etc. But they are stakeholders. Okay, and I don't think this has been proven out in the court of law yet. I have no idea. I'm not going to say I don't care because I do care about what's going on in the ecosystem, but I have no stake in this. And I had no beef with the company at all or the project until they disrespected me. And then my only beef was that they were rude and unprofessional. That was it. I think that the mentality that has been held by the member of the management that made that comment is rife throughout the industry, and it shows a lack of maturity in the management of many projects. Not all, but many of them. What I would have done was I would have contacted the patent holder and say, well, tell me what you think it infringes. Okay, show me how, and show me if there's a value add for me licensing it. The patent holder either will or will not do it. And if they do it, they work something out. If they don't work something out, then they don't. And if it was to go forward, then we'll go forward most likely by force through the court system. Okay, but now, as I understand it, that project is now on full notice that there's a patent that exists, that the patent holder and many of their stakeholders have a suspicion that that company infringes on that patent. And so they can never say we didn't know. So if it ever comes,
it goes one step further than that. The document put out by the very DAO proves that there's infringement, and it's been made public.
Okay.
So they can't claim they didn't know.
Right. And, it's just not the way business is done for my book. Patents are not bad. To be truthful, this entity has a fairly unique value proposal. I don't know about the quality of the code, the quality of the business model, et cetera. I can't opine upon that. But they have an interesting and a relatively unique value proposition. License the code. License the IP. Use it to market, push further. It's a value add as long as it's priced correctly. And the patent holder has no incentive to overprice, particularly in the beginning, because they want people to adopt the technology. It's just bad business, not to mention unethical and rude, but let's take all that subjective stuff out. Simply just bad business.
Well, I can tell you a bunch of token holders are now seeking legal counsel to investigate what their position means. So you're absolutely right.
And it's like I said, the guys brought it upon themselves. I can't say I feel sorry for them. They brought it upon themselves. It's ridiculous,
Okay.
Well, I have nothing to do with it, by the way. So it's not Reggie. So don't come looking at me.
There's also the thing that I was talking about in regards to the silver case stuff. But again, we're talking for a very long period of time. So this is going to be a lot for people to try to sparse through to figure out what they understand, what they connect with and stuff. So I would like to bring this to a close because I believe we've gone over an hour and a half. So we got to break this down into bites. Okay.
That's a lot more than that 20 or 30 minutes you promised me, but I'm going to let that
go. Yes.
Okay.
So thanks, Reggie. Thanks, Trek. I'm going to sign off. Great interview.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, 91.
Okay. So on that note,
again,
go ahead. You talk, Trek.
I just say, sorry. So close out on that. This is just not a one-time conversation thing. This is not just to make opine for one person. This is a question that the rest of the space needs to ask, and people who are looking to build businesses going forward about, doing business in this regulated jurisdictional space thing. Here's a person that you need to talk to, at least in my opinion, right? But anyway, you can have the last words, Reggie.
Okay. On that note, learn, educate yourself. Learn from primary sources. Don't go to the media because the media has all media. It has ulterior motives. That tweet that I put out basically says that our research has told us, and our analysis has told us that Ethereum infringes on patented IP. Hence, it's arguable that everything that uses Ethereum patents on IP. So that's all the unit swaps and the different swaps and Decentraland and, the metaverse and NFTs and the big exchanges who trade off of that chain, the Coinbases and the Krakens and the Binances. Sounds like a big deal. And then we add in other chains such as Binance Smart Chain and the Bitcoin Lightning Network and RippleNet and on-demand liquidity. Solana. Sounds like a real big deal. So let's go. What does CoinDesk have to say about that? Absolutely nothing. Why? Well, my theory through my analysis is that CoinDesk receives a lot of their compensation from the portfolio that invested in all these companies. So I could be wrong. Again, not only I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not a journalist as well. But I do pride myself in researching primary sources, and that should tell you not to ignore CoinDesk or all the big media entities, but anybody who makes the proclamations and claims that I have should be worth investigating. Craig Wright has made something that's much, much less pertinent, in my opinion, that he's Satoshi Nakamoto. Whether he is or he's not, I could care less. Doesn't really matter to me. But he's not saying that he has IP that touches, doesn't control, but touches. And I'm not saying it does not control or does control. I'm just being very clear on my terminology. Touches 70% or more crypto, right? With a claim such as that, you would wonder how come nobody's ever bothered to investigate it. And my opinion is they all investigated it. And the investigations have found that it does, which is why you won't hear from it. Okay. I could be wrong, CoinDesk. I dare you. Report on it. On that note, I think I'm done. I'm out.
All right, so am I.
Okay. I'm going to end this live. 3, 2.